The sun was sinking behind the Arizona mountains, turning the sky orange and gold, when Daniel Hayes found the young Apache woman for the first time. He had been riding along the edge of his land, checking the fences after hearing distant noise earlier in the afternoon. Smoke still floated in the air from some trouble he could not yet see. But the moment he spotted someone lying near the rocks, everything inside him shifted. He thought it might be a child or maybe a traveler hurt on the road. When he stepped closer, he realized it was a grown woman, an Apache woman, breathing unevenly, struggling to move her arm. Daniel knew what this meant. He lived in a place where settlers and Apache people rarely mixed without trouble. Bringing an injured Apache woman to his home could spark anger from both sides, but he had been raised by a mother who repeated one rule again and again. If someone is hurt, you help them. No questions. That simple thought guided him now. He dropped to his knees beside her and gently spoke, unsure if she understood English. Her eyes opened, dark and alert even in pain, watching him with deep suspicion. But she didn't push him away. She looked like someone who had fought for a long time, and finally had no strength left to fight more. He lifted her slowly, careful not to touch her injured shoulder, and carried her to his horse. She winced, but did not speak. Her silence was not weakness. It felt like she was protecting her pride, her culture, and her identity even while injured. Daniel admired that. He helped her onto the horse and guided her to his cabin a mile away. Every few minutes, he glanced back to see if she was all right. She always met his eyes with a steady, brave expression, like she refused to appear weak in front of a stranger. Daniel's cabin was small, simple, and quiet. He lived alone ever since his parents passed, working the ranch by himself. When he brought her inside, she remained standing near the doorway, tense and unsure. He offered her water, and she accepted it with a nod but kept her distance. Daniel didn't crowd her. He sensed that trust was something she gave slowly, not quickly. When he prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, he noticed she did not reach for food until he stepped back. She ate with small, careful bites, like she was still deciding whether she was safe here. Daniel didn't ask her questions. He didn't want to push too much. She finally told him her name, Nayeli, and that small exchange felt like a gift. The name suited her. Strong, sharp, but gentle at the edges. As the night grew colder, she moved her left arm slightly and winced again. Daniel spoke softly, telling her he could help bandage it. But she shook her head. Apache warriors, whether men or women, did not show their pain easily. Daniel respected this and didn't insist. He only placed clean cloth and water nearby in case she changed her mind. At dawn, horse hooves echoed outside. Daniel stepped outside to see several Apache men approaching. He didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he raised both hands to show peace. The men dismounted and spoke to Nayeli in their language. One of them, older and more serious than the rest, looked at Daniel with sharp eyes. He asked why Daniel had touched her, brought her here, helped her. Daniel explained calmly that she was hurt and he only wanted to keep her safe. The man listened, and for a long moment, the air felt heavy. Then he nodded in a respectful way that surprised Daniel. Their leader explained that in their tradition, a man who saves a woman during danger sometimes becomes tied to her fate. It was a gesture of protection, a way to avoid conflict between families and clans. Daniel did not know much about Apache customs, but he understood honor. When they proposed a peace marriage between him and Nayeli, to protect her from misunderstandings with her own people, Daniel didn't reject the idea. He didn't do it out of romance. He simply felt responsible for her safety, and if marriage was the only way to prevent her clan from thinking he harmed her, then he would stand with her. Nayeli stood silent during the announcement, her proud posture straight even through the pain in her shoulder. She accepted the agreement, though her eyes showed uncertainty. She did not know him, he did not know her. They were strangers tied together by fate, not love. But Daniel sensed she was strong enough to walk into a new life without fear. After the clan left, the cabin felt different. Not bigger, not smaller, just changed. 2 people lived here now. Daniel tried to make space for her. giving her the small room his mother once used, clearing shelves so she could place her things. She placed almost nothing. She owned little, and even those few items she kept close, like she still expected someone to take them away. The following days were quiet. Daniel would work outside, repairing fences and tending to the animals. Nayeli moved slowly, always careful with her shoulder, doing simple tasks like sweeping or gathering water. She never asked for help, even when he could see she needed it. Daniel admired her courage but wished she trusted him more. He often caught her watching him from the doorway while he worked. Her stare wasn't harsh, it was curious, like she was studying him, deciding who he truly was. Every evening they ate together in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply two different worlds learning to share one space. Daniel never tried to touch her or stand too close. He didn't want her to think he claimed power over her just because they were married by tradition. Instead, he gave her room, hoping she would see he meant no harm. But he couldn't ignore her injury forever. One morning, while chopping wood, Nayeli suddenly paused and pressed her hand against her shoulder. Her breath caught. She tried to continue working but dropped the axe with a quiet gasp. Daniel rushed forward, but she stepped back quickly, her pride rising strong as a shield. She didn't want to appear weak in front of him, but Daniel spoke softly, telling her he saw she was hurting, and he didn't want her to suffer alone. This time she didn't argue. She let him walk her back to the cabin and sit her down. When she loosened her dress slightly at the shoulder, Daniel saw how swollen the bruise had become, a deep, dark mark spreading across her upper back. It looked painful, and he realized she had been enduring this for days without letting him help. He suggested taking her into town to see a doctor, but she shook her head firmly. She didn't trust settlers' medicine. She trusted the healing ways of her own people. Daniel didn't push. He only nodded, showing her that he respected her wishes. That afternoon, she sat by the window, staring at the mountains with a thoughtful expression. She seemed torn between fear, pride, and something softer, maybe gratitude. She knew Daniel had treated her with care since the first day, yet she still carried the weight of her culture and past experiences. Trust was not something she gave easily. As the sun set, a lone horse approached the cabin. Daniel stepped outside, ready for anything. But the rider was an Apache warrior with calm eyes and a small bag of herbs tied to his belt. He greeted Nayeli in their language and entered the cabin with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. This man, her cousin, came not for conflict but for healing. This moment would soon begin the change none of them expected. Taza, Nayeli's cousin, stepped into the small cabin with the calm presence of someone who had traveled long distances without letting the journey disturb his mind. He carried dried herbs, wrapped carefully in deer hide, and a small clay bowl. Daniel watched him, unsure how to act, but determined not to interfere. The Apache warrior moved with quiet confidence, greeting Nayeli softly. She answered with relief in her voice, though she still held her arm carefully. Like every movement caused a hidden ache, Taza studied her shoulder, his expression steady but serious. He didn't scold her for hiding her pain from her new husband. He simply understood. Pride was something Apache people carried deeply, and Nayeli was known for her strength. But even strength had limits. He gently asked her how long she had felt the pain. She avoided his eyes, and he already knew the answer. Daniel stood on the other side of the room, hands behind his back, not wanting to crowd them. He felt like an outsider in his own home, yet he also felt responsible for Nayeli's well-being. Taza glanced at him once, studying him in silence. There was no anger in his eyes, only curiosity. Maybe even a measure of respect for how Daniel had treated Nayeli so far. When Taza finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. Nayeli needed proper treatment, and the injury could not be ignored anymore. She must remain still while the herbs were prepared and applied. Nayeli nodded. Daniel knew she didn't like showing pain in front of anyone, but she trusted Taza. And maybe, just a little, she was beginning to trust him too. Daniel watched as Taza sat on the floor and began mixing herbs with warm water from the kettle. A strong, earthy smell filled the cabin, carrying hints of sage and crushed leaves. Every movement Taza made felt purposeful, like he'd done this 1,000 times. Daniel suddenly felt grateful Nayeli had someone from her people who understood these traditions. Nayeli sat near the bed, breathing carefully, trying to hide the discomfort that rose with every shift of her body. Taza finished preparing the mixture, then looked at her with a gentle expression that softened his warrior's face. He whispered instructions in their language, and even without understanding the words, Daniel understood the meaning. Nayeli hesitated only a moment before obeying. She lowered herself onto the bed and lay face down, her injured shoulder exposed so the herbs could reach the deep muscle where the bruise had settled. She kept her head turned to the side, eyes half closed, breathing slowly. Daniel took a small step back, not wanting her to feel watched. But Taza called him closer with a small hand gesture. Daniel approached, but stopped at a respectful distance. Taza pointed to the herbs and began explaining in slow English how the mixture worked. The herbs reduced swelling, pulled out heat from the wound, and eased muscle pain. Daniel listened carefully, memorizing every detail. As Taza applied the warm mixture to Nayeli's shoulder, she let out a quiet breath, half pain, half relief. She didn't hide it this time. The healing touch was firm but careful, following the ancient techniques passed down in Apache families. Daniel realized he was witnessing something sacred, something not usually shared with outsiders. Taza worked slowly, pressing the herbs gently into the swollen skin. Every time Nayeli tensed, he whispered comforting words. Daniel could tell they shared a strong bond, not just as family, but as two people who had faced hardship side by side in the past. When the treatment was done, Taza covered the herbs with a warm cloth and instructed Nayeli to rest. He turned to Daniel and explained the next steps. Daniel would need to apply the herbs twice a day until the swelling faded. He must not press too hard, and he must make sure the mixture stayed warm. Daniel nodded, taking the responsibility seriously. For the first time, Taza gave him a small smile, a gesture that told Daniel he was earning trust. Nayeli sat up slowly after a few minutes, still tired but looking more at ease. Her eyes softened when they met Daniel's. She knew he had respected her space during the healing, and that he cared enough to learn her people's ways. Trust didn't come fast to her, but it was starting to build quietly, like a small fire catching flame. Taza stayed for supper, though the cabin had only modest food. Daniel offered what he had: bread, beans, dried meat, and Taza accepted politely. Nayeli ate quietly, sitting between the two men who now shared the responsibility of her healing. The silence during the meal wasn't heavy. It felt more like three people learning how to share the same air. After eating, Taza spoke softly about the raid from which Nayeli had escaped. Daniel listened carefully, understanding the danger she had been in and how lucky she was to survive. She had fallen on a sharp rock when running, and the injury had worsened as she traveled. It touched Daniel deeply to know she had carried that pain so bravely. When the sky outside turned dark and the stars appeared, Taza prepared to leave. He placed a hand on Nayeli's uninjured shoulder, telling her to stay strong and follow the treatment instructions. He looked at Daniel once more, giving him a final piece of advice. Respect her pride, but do not let her hide pain from you again. Daniel agreed. He walked outside with Taza as he mounted his horse. You care for her, Taza said. Not as a question but a statement. I do, Daniel answered honestly. I want her to heal. I want her to feel safe here. Taza nodded, then rode off into the night, leaving Daniel with a mix of responsibility and determination. Inside the cabin, Nayeli sat quietly near the fire. The warm glow lit her face, showing the tired lines that pain had carved into her expression. Daniel approached with gentle steps, not wanting to startle her. He asked if she needed anything: water, more blankets, or maybe help adjusting her arm. She shook her head, but then surprised him by speaking softly. You listen, she said. Many men do not. Daniel felt a small, warm ache in his chest at her words. He thanked her and sat down across from her. They talked more that night than they had since she first arrived. Nayeli told him small things, nothing too personal yet, but enough to show she was opening up. She talked about her clan, her childhood memories of running through the forests, and the songs her mother used to hum. Daniel shared stories about his parents, the ranch, and the long, quiet years spent alone. For the first time, their conversation felt natural. Before going to rest, Nayeli paused and said something Daniel would never forget. "Thank you for respecting my way." It was a simple sentence, but it carried weight, acceptance, trust, and the beginning of something gentle forming between them. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep easily. He lay awake, thinking of the responsibility he now carried. Not just as her husband by tradition, but as someone who wanted to protect her, not control her. He wondered if she knew how deeply he admired her strength. In the early morning, Nayeli awoke with less pain for the first time in days. The swelling had eased a little. She touched her shoulder gently and breathed out in relief. When Daniel entered the room, she didn't tense like before. Instead, she looked at him calmly and thanked him again. Daniel prepared the herbs as Taza had taught. Nayeli watched him with careful eyes, testing whether he remembered everything. He warmed the mixture, stirred it slowly, and approached with steady hands. She lay down without hesitation this time, trusting him enough to let him help. When his hands gently placed the warm cloth over her shoulder, she relaxed. She didn't hide her breath of relief. She didn't hide her pain either. For the first time, she allowed him to see both. Daniel realized this moment meant more than any ceremony or promise. It meant he was no longer a stranger in her eyes. He was becoming someone she could rely on. And deeply inside, Nayeli began to feel something she hadn't felt since she left her clan's safety. Their new life had only begun, but something fragile and beautiful was starting to grow between them, formed not from force or obligation, but from patience, respect, and small acts of kindness. The morning air carried a soft chill when Daniel stepped outside to fetch more water. The sun was still low, its light barely touching the tops of the distant mountains. Inside the cabin, Nayeli rested on her side, her shoulder wrapped with fresh herbs he had applied earlier. She looked calmer than before, breathing evenly, not fighting the pain with every breath. Seeing her healing little by little filled Daniel with quiet satisfaction. He didn't say it aloud, but he felt proud that she trusted his hands enough to allow him to treat her. When she finally sat up, she watched him prepare breakfast. He moved quietly, trying not to disturb her. She observed him with a thoughtful expression, like she was slowly learning how this man lived, worked, and cared for others. Daniel offered her a warm bowl of food, and she accepted without hesitation this time. Each small acceptance from her felt like a step closer, though he didn't expect anything. He only wanted her to heal. By midday, a gentle warmth spread across the land. Daniel worked outside, repairing the barn door, while Nayeli sat in the shade near the cabin, weaving a small pouch from dried grass. It was something she used to do in her village, and the familiar task seemed to bring her peace. Every once in a while, she glanced at Daniel, studying the way he hammered nails, how he wiped sweat from his brow, how he stayed patient, even when the wood resisted him. Their calm day changed when Nayeli tried to lift a bucket of water. She had forgotten her shoulder for a moment and moved too quickly. A sharp sting of pain made her stop. Daniel saw it from a distance and hurried over, concern in his steps. She tried to act as if nothing happened, but her expression gave her away. Daniel gently took the bucket from her and told her she didn't need to strain herself. Nayeli looked frustrated not with him, but with her own body. She hated feeling slow or limited. Daniel didn't scold her. He simply said the words she didn't expect. "You're strong. But even strong people need time to heal." Those words reached her deeper than he knew. Later that afternoon, as the sun began lowering behind the hills, horse hooves approached again. Nayeli stiffened at the sound. Daniel sensed her worry and stepped outside first. Taza had returned. His expression was calm, but his voice carried seriousness. He told Daniel there were more healing steps needed and he wanted to check Nayeli's progress. Inside the cabin, Nayeli greeted her cousin with respect. Taza examined her shoulder carefully, pressing gently around the bruise. She breathed through the discomfort, not hiding her reactions this time. Taza nodded in approval. She was healing, but the muscle was still tight and needed deeper treatment to prevent lasting stiffness. He instructed Daniel to prepare the mixture again. Daniel moved quickly, warming water and crushing the herbs exactly as Taza had shown him the day before. Nayeli watched him, noticing the care he put into doing everything correctly. She didn't feel embarrassed this time. Something inside her had changed. She no longer felt alone in her pain. Once everything was ready, Taza spoke to Nayeli in their language again. Daniel didn't understand the words, but the tone was gentle, almost protective. Nayeli lowered herself to the bed, lying face down the same way she had during the first treatment. The cloth of her dress shifted slightly as she positioned herself, but she did not tense or hesitate. She trusted the process now. She trusted Taza, and she trusted Daniel, who stood nearby with the warm mixture ready. Taza showed Daniel where to place his hands this time. The herbs needed to be pressed a little deeper into the muscle, but still gently, never forcing anything. Daniel swallowed, unsure if he was skilled enough, but Taza encouraged him. He applied the mixture slowly, careful to follow every instruction. Nayeli breathed out softly when the warmth spread across her shoulder. She did not hide the sound. She had learned she didn't need to pretend in front of Daniel anymore. Her trust felt like a quiet gift in the room. Daniel noticed how tense her back was, how tired her muscles looked from days of enduring pain without rest. He worked gently, letting the warmth sink into her skin. Taza watched closely, making sure Daniel didn't press too hard. After a few minutes, Taza stepped back, arms crossed, observing with a small, approving nod. The room stayed silent except for Nayeli's slow breathing. Daniel felt the responsibility of every touch. He wasn't just helping a stranger. He was helping someone who had been thrust into his life by fate, someone who deserved respect and careful treatment. The thought made him even more cautious. When the treatment ended, Nayeli didn't move immediately. She remained still, letting the herbs settle. Daniel stepped away to give her space. Taza gathered his things, then told her she was improving quickly. He also said something unexpected. Daniel was doing well. Nayeli looked up at her cousin, and something gentle flickered in her expression. When she finally sat up, she wrapped her blanket around her shoulders and noticed Daniel watching her, waiting to see if she was all right. She offered him a small, grateful smile. He didn't expect it, but it warmed him in a quiet way. After Taza finished his final instructions, he prepared to leave again. Daniel walked him outside. The sky was turning gold, and the air smelled of warm dust and sage. Taza spoke honestly. He told Daniel that Nayeli had suffered much in recent years. Even before the injury, she had seen loss, hardship, and cold seasons of loneliness. Trusting someone new, especially someone from outside her people, was not easy for her. Daniel listened carefully, feeling the weight of Taza's words. He promised he would continue to treat her with respect and patience. Taza looked at him with the kind of approval that came slowly, earned through quiet actions rather than loud promises. Then he rode away, leaving Daniel alone with a growing sense of responsibility and something else he didn't name yet. Something soft but steady forming inside him. When Daniel returned inside, Nayeli was sitting near the fire, her eyes resting on the flames. She looked calmer, not just because of the healing, but because something had shifted inside her. When he asked how she felt, she answered honestly. The pain was still there, but lighter. The treatment was helping, and she said she was grateful not just for the healing, but for him learning her people's methods instead of forcing his own ideas. Daniel sat across from her, the firelight flickering across both their faces. For a while they didn't speak. They simply shared the same space in a peaceful silence that felt different from before. Not uncomfortable, not distant. It felt like they were two people beginning to understand each other. Later that evening, she surprised him again. She told him about the place she grew up, a hidden valley surrounded by tall pines and clear streams. She described how she used to race her cousins up the hills, always reaching the top first. As she spoke, her voice carried warmth, almost happiness. Daniel listened like every word mattered. When she grew tired, Daniel prepared her bed. She watched him quietly, noticing the care he put into simple tasks. She lay down slowly, testing her shoulder. For the first time since she arrived, she slept without wincing in the first few minutes. Daniel stood by the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe softly. He didn't know what their future looked like. They were still strangers tied by tradition, still learning how to share a life neither had chosen. But he knew one thing clearly: he would not let her face her pain alone again. Nayeli drifted into sleep with a peaceful expression, knowing she wasn't alone anymore. And Daniel went to his bed feeling something new, something like hope. Their story was far from over, but slowly, step by step, a bond was beginning to take root. Not forced, not rushed, simply growing in the quiet space between kindness and trust. The next few days passed with a quiet rhythm that felt new to both Daniel and Nayeli. Life on the ranch still demanded work, animals needed feeding, fences needed repair, the land needed tending, but everything seemed calmer now. The air around the cabin felt lighter, as if the heavy worry that once surrounded them had begun to fade. Every morning, Daniel prepared the warm herbal mixture as Taza had taught him, and every morning, Nayeli allowed him to treat her shoulder without hesitation. She still lay face down during the treatment, but she no longer tensed up or guarded herself. Her breaths came slow and steady, showing how much trust she had developed. Daniel noticed the way her muscles slowly relaxed each time. He was careful and gentle, never pressing too hard, always watching for the slightest sign of discomfort. Nayeli appreciated how he never treated her like someone fragile or helpless. He simply cared for her, in a quiet, respectful way. That alone made her feel stronger. By the 4th or 5th day, the bruise began to fade. The swelling was nearly gone. Nayeli could move her arm more naturally, though she still avoided lifting heavy things. Daniel kept reminding her not to rush her healing, but she was stubborn, insisting she could take on more tasks now. He watched her with a mix of admiration and worry. Even healing, she carried herself like someone who had survived many storms. Every afternoon, Daniel found her practicing small movements outside, stretching her arm carefully the way Taza instructed. The sun warmed her skin, and the breeze carried the scent of sagebrush across the ranch. Sometimes Daniel worked nearby, mending tools or brushing down the horses, pretending not to watch her too closely. But Nayeli noticed. She noticed everything he did, just as he noticed each quiet change in her mood and posture. One day, she walked out to the corral where Daniel was fixing a loose plank. Her steps were more confident now. When he turned at the sound of her footsteps, she held out a piece of freshly woven grass rope she had finished earlier that morning. It was strong, neat, and surprisingly well made. "For you," she said softly, almost shyly. Daniel accepted it with a small smile, surprised by the simple gift. He knew how much skill and time went into making something like that. "Thank you," he said. "It's beautiful." Nayeli lowered her eyes but smiled back. "You have helped me. I wanted to do something." That small exchange stayed with Daniel for the rest of the day. It wasn't the rope itself, it was the meaning behind it. Nayeli had begun giving pieces of herself, little by little. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Later that afternoon, while Daniel saddled his horse to check the far field, Nayeli asked if she could come along. It was the first time she had asked to join him outside the immediate area around the cabin. Daniel paused, concerned about her shoulder, but she assured him she felt strong enough. He trusted her judgment, so he brought an extra blanket and carefully helped her onto the horse behind him. They rode slowly across the land, the golden light of late afternoon stretching across the open fields. The ride was peaceful. Nayeli held onto the leather strap rather than to Daniel, giving him space but staying close enough to feel steady. She studied the land with thoughtful eyes, its hills, its dry valleys, its quiet strength. It was so different from the forested home she once knew. Yet something about its open sky and endless horizon felt strangely comforting. When they reached the far field, Daniel dismounted and helped her down gently. She walked toward a patch of tall grass, running her fingers through the blades. "This land listens," she said softly. "The runs." She blades softly, rovers. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Listens?" She nodded. "My people say the land hears the feet that walk on it. It remembers kindness and remembers harm. Your land, it feels calm." She glanced toward him, and her voice grew even quieter. Like you. Those words touched Daniel in a way he didn't expect. He didn't know how to answer, so he simply nodded and let the moment settle around them like warm sunlight. On their way back to the cabin, they passed a fallen branch stuck in the fence. Daniel stopped to remove it, but when he tried to lift a heavy piece of wood, his hand slipped, and he scraped it against a sharp edge. Blood appeared in a thin line across his palm. He didn't make a sound, but Nayeli saw immediately. She stepped closer, her eyes full of concern he didn't expect. "Let me see," she said. He tried to brush it off, saying it was only a small cut, but Nayeli insisted. She took his hand gently and studied the wound. Her fingers were warm against his skin. She tore a clean strip of cloth from her pouch and wrapped his hand with practiced skill. It reminded Daniel of how she had taken care of her younger siblings years ago. Her movements were steady, confident, comforting. "You helped me," she said. "Now I help you." The simplicity of her words struck him deeply. It felt like something inside both of them clicked into place, a balance forming naturally, without rush, without pressure. As evening fell, they returned to the cabin. The warmth of the fire reached them first, filling the room with a golden glow. They sat across from each other, while Daniel cooked a simple meal. Nayeli watched him quietly, feeling more at ease in the home she once approached with fear. After they finished eating, a long silence passed, but it wasn't empty. It felt like they were sharing something unspoken. The flame danced in the hearth, casting soft shadows across Nayeli's face. She looked thoughtful, almost peaceful. "You treat me with honor," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Even though my ways are different." Daniel looked up. "You deserve that. Everyone does." She held his gaze for a long moment. Something warm passed between them, not romance, not anything rushed or heavy, just a deepening of understanding. She wasn't alone anymore. And Daniel realized that the loneliness he had carried since his parents' deaths had begun to fade too. Without forcing it, they were becoming parts of each other's lives. That night, Nayeli went to rest earlier than usual. Her shoulder still tired easily, but the pain was now manageable. Before going into her room, she paused and looked at Daniel. "You learn my ways," she said softly. Not many men would do that. Daniel set aside the bowl he was washing. "I want to learn. I want to understand you." Nayeli lowered her eyes but smiled. Not a quick smile, but one that came slowly, like something blooming after a long winter. She went to her room, leaving Daniel alone with the fire's fading warmth. He sat for a while, thinking about everything that had happened, not just the treatments or the conversations, but the small moments in between. The way she no longer avoided his eyes, the way she let him help her without feeling ashamed, the way she helped him back. It all pointed to something growing, something steady and real. Outside, the wind rustled the grass gently, as if agreeing with the changes happening inside the cabin. Daniel rose, stretched his tired shoulders, and put out the lamps. As he headed to his room, he whispered to himself a truth he had begun to understand. Trust was more precious than anything, and he was willing to keep earning hers day by day. In her room, Nayeli fell asleep with a heart lighter than it had been in years, knowing she finally had someone who saw her strength not as something dangerous or intimidating, but as something worthy of respect. Neither of them spoke it aloud yet, but both felt the same quiet thought forming. They were no longer just two strangers living under one roof. They were becoming a team, something strong, gentle, and lasting. The next morning arrived softly, with pale sunlight slipping through the wooden shutters of the small cabin. Daniel woke early, as he always did. But something felt different inside him. Maybe it was the peaceful way Nayeli had smiled the night before. Maybe it was the quiet comfort they had begun sharing without words. Or maybe it was simply the feeling that the space between them had finally shifted from uncertainty to calm understanding. Nayeli stepped out of her room a little later, her shoulder moving almost normally now. She still moved carefully, but the heavy stiffness from before had almost vanished. She wore a simple woven cloth over her dress, and her hair was tied back with a thin leather strip. She looked stronger, more rested, standing straighter than she had in weeks. Daniel greeted her with a gentle nod and handed her a warm cup of tea. She accepted it without hesitation, another sign of the trust they had built. The warmth from the cup spread through her hands, and she inhaled the herbal scent with quiet appreciation. After breakfast, Daniel offered to check the cattle in the lower field, and Nayeli surprised him by saying she wanted to come along. Her voice wasn't uncertain this time, it carried confidence. Daniel studied her shoulder for a moment, but she gave him a firm look that told him she was ready. He nodded, and together, they stepped outside into the open morning air. The walk to the cattle field was slow but steady. Birds chirped above them, and the warm desert breeze carried dust across the ground. Nayeli walked beside Daniel, not behind him, not cautiously, but with natural ease. Every now and then she glanced at him, as though noticing how peaceful he looked out here, working on land he had cared for most of his life. When they reached the field, Daniel checked the animals while Nayeli watched the horizon. She saw movement in the distance, figures on horseback coming toward them. She tensed instantly. Daniel saw the worry flash across her face and followed her gaze. The riders grew closer, and he recognized their style of dress before they reached the fence. It was her clan. Nayeli's breath caught in her chest. She wasn't afraid of them, but she knew what their visit meant. They had come to see her, to check if she was being treated well, to make sure the marriage formed by tradition was honored respectfully. Daniel walked closer to her, not protectively, but supportively. He wanted her to feel she wasn't facing this alone. Taza rode in front, his horse kicking small clouds of dust into the air. When he saw Nayeli standing beside Daniel with calm strength in her posture, he exhaled softly, as though relieved. Behind him stood 3 elders and 2 younger warriors. They dismounted and approached, slowly. Nayeli lifted her chin and greeted them with dignity. She explained that she was healing, her voice steady and sure. The elders studied her closely, noticing the improvement in her shoulder, the peaceful look in her eyes, and the way she stood comfortably near Daniel. They exchanged quiet looks, as if silently agreeing that she was safe. One of the elders turned to Daniel and asked if he had followed their traditional healing instructions. Daniel nodded respectfully and explained every step he had taken, even showing them the herbs he continued to prepare each morning. The elder listened carefully, and a small trace of approval softened his stern expression. Taza stepped forward next, speaking directly to Nayeli. He asked how she felt, not just physically, but inside her heart. Nayeli looked toward Daniel for a brief moment, and something gentle passed between them. She then told Taza that she felt respected, cared for, and that her strength was returning day by day. Hearing those words from her made Daniel feel a quiet warmth spread through his chest. The elders gathered in a small circle and spoke briefly among themselves. After a few moments, the oldest stepped forward and addressed both Nayeli and Daniel. He said that a marriage tied through tradition could only survive through mutual honor, patience, and shared responsibility, not by force, not by fear. He asked Nayeli if she wished to stay or return with them. There was no pressure, no expectation. The choice was completely hers. Nayeli stood silent for a moment. The breeze lifted a strand of her hair as she looked around the mountains in the distance, the cattle grazing peacefully, the small cabin that had become her shelter, and the man beside her who had treated her with more respect than she ever expected. She looked into Daniel's eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't try to influence her decision. He simply waited, letting her choose her own path. Nayeli finally turned to the elders. Her voice did not shake. "I wish to stay. I wish to stay." The elder nodded with deep respect. "Then this home is yours," he said. "And this man is part of your family now." Daniel felt something shift inside him, something deep and meaningful. This was no longer just a duty he had accepted to protect her. This was a bond they were choosing together. Taza stepped forward and placed a hand briefly on Daniel's shoulder, a gesture of acceptance. Then he handed Nayeli a small carved token, a symbol from her people, telling her she would always have a place in their hearts, even far from home. Before leaving, Taza turned back to Daniel, his voice low but sincere. She is strong. But even strong hearts need gentle hands. You have shown both. Daniel nodded, promising to continue honoring her strength and her ways. After the clan rode away, the ranch felt strangely quiet. Nayeli stood watching the distant dust trail until it faded. Daniel approached her slowly, unsure what to say. But she spoke first. "I chose to stay," she said simply. "Because this place feels safe. And because you have given me honor without asking anything in return." Daniel didn't know how to answer the sudden warmth in her words. He only said the truth. "I'm glad you're here." Nayeli smiled softly, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. It wasn't quick or shy. It was warm and full, like a new chapter opening. They walked back to the cabin together. The day was still young, and there was work to do, but everything felt different now. The quiet between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like peace, a shared peace. Inside the cabin, Nayeli placed the carved token gently on a shelf. Daniel watched her, realizing that this simple act meant she was building a life here, not just passing through. She turned to him and spoke with calm confidence. "You gave me trust," she said. "Now I give you the same." For Daniel, those words meant more than anything he could have asked for. They spent the rest of the day working side by side. Nayeli moved with stronger steps, helping with tasks she could manage. Daniel checked on her shoulder from time to time, but she no longer resisted his concern. She accepted it, appreciated it, and balanced it with her own strength. As evening settled in, they shared a quiet dinner. The fire glowed softly, filling the cabin with warm light. Nayeli told him stories from her childhood, funny moments, memories of seasons spent gathering berries or racing her cousins along the river. Daniel shared stories of his parents, their kindness, their teachings. Each story brought them closer, weaving their lives together. When night finally covered the land, Nayeli stood by the doorway of her room. She looked at Daniel, her eyes gentle, steady. "This home feels different now," she said. "It feels like it belongs to both of us." Daniel felt something settle peacefully in his chest. "It does," he said quietly. "As long as you want it." She nodded, touched by his words, then stepped into her room with a soft smile that stayed in Daniel's mind long after she closed the door. The ranch was quiet that night. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, as if blessing the new life beginning inside the cabin. And Daniel lay awake for a few minutes, thinking about the unexpected journey that had brought them together. Nayeli's choice to stay wasn't just a decision, it was a promise. And Daniel silently promised himself he would protect her trust for the rest of his life. Not through force, but through kindness, patience, and honor. Together, they were no longer strangers. They were no longer two worlds forced into one. They were partners building a life shaped not by circumstance, but by mutual respect and quiet, growing affection. Their story would continue far beyond this chapter. But for now, both felt the same gentle truth. They had finally found a home in each other,